Hi everyone. Now I continue to record lesson 1, mini story, the day of the dead. Welcome to the mini story for Day of the Dead. In the mini story, I will do 3 things. I will make a statement. For example, I arrived in Guatemala. When you hear a statement, a second, you just say, ah, or oh. You need to say that. Show that you understand this is not a question. A statement is not a question. So, when you hear a statement, say, ah. For example, I arrived in Guatemala. Ah. The second thing I will do is ask a question you know the answer to. For example, where do I arrive? I will stop. You say the answer. You must say the answer to every question. I said, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive? You said, Guatemala. Easy. And number 3. I might ask a question you don't know the answer to. If you don't know the answer, just guess. Send the answer. But you must answer every question. Use your pause, but if necessary. Let's begin. Here we go. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala? Yes, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive? Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead? Well, me, AJ. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd? No, I didn't arrive in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. What day did I arrive in Guatemala? November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st? Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday? No, I wasn't angry about this holiday. Was I sad about this holiday? No, I wasn't sad about this holiday. I was curious about this holiday. Who was curious about this holiday? Well, I was, AJ. I was curious about this holiday. What was I curious about? The holiday. I was curious about the holiday. Which holiday was I curious about? Which holidays was I curious about? The Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead? Or was I curious about Christmas? No, I was curious about the Day of the Dead, of course. I was curious about the Day of the Dead, so I went to cemeteries to see what was happening. Where did I go? To the cemetery. I went to the cemetery. Did I go to the cemetery or did I go to the airport? Easy, I went to cemetery. Who went to the cemetery? Well, me, AJ, I went to the cemetery. Where did I go? To the cemetery, right. I went to the cemetery. When did I go to the cemetery? November 1st, the day of the death. I went to the cemetery on the day of the death, November 1st. Why did I go to the cemetery? Well, to see what was happening. I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening? Me and Chase went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where was the cemetery? In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala. What is the day of the dead? A holiday. The day of the dead is a holiday. When is the day of the dead? November 1st. The day of the dead was and is November 1st. So I went to the cemetery on the day of the death to see what was happening. What I found was quite interesting. Was it boring? No, it wasn't boring. Was it interesting? Yes, it was interesting. The cemetery was interesting. How did I feel about the cemetery? I felt it was interesting or I thought it was interesting. Was it boring or was interesting? It was interesting. Of course, it was interesting. What was interesting? The cemetery. The cemetery was interesting. When was the cemetery interesting? It was interesting on the day of the death, November 1st. The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Was the atmosphere very sad? No, the atmosphere was very sad. The atmosphere was like a party. The atmosphere was very happy. Was the atmosphere sad or happy? The atmosphere was very happy. The atmosphere was like a party. What was like a party? The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Where was the atmosphere like a party? In the cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house? No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party at the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families are sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Where was the family sitting? Around the graves. They were sitting around the graves. Who was sitting around the graves? The families. The families were sitting around the graves. Were they sitting around the trees? The trees? No, they weren't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves. So where were they sitting? Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves or their dead ancestors? Yes, they're sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves or their friends? No, not really. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Who was sitting around the graves? That's right. Families were sitting around the graves. Who's sitting around the graves? Whose race was they sitting around? Yes, the dead center. Their centers. Their center grace. They were sitting around the race of their dead centers. Were they sitting around the race of their dead centers or the race of their friends? Centers, right? They were sitting around the race of their dead centers. They cleaned the race and ate fresh flowers. Who cleaned the race? That's right, the families. What did they add? They added fresh flowers. Did they add food? No, they didn't add food. Did they add money? No, they didn't add money. They add fresh flowers. What did they clean? They cleaned the grass. Whose grass did they clean? Their centers. They cleaned their center grass. Where did they add flowers? Where? They add flowers to the grass. That's right. They clean the grass and add fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemeteries and admired the beautiful upon the colorful flowers. Where did I walk? Through the cemetery. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the park? No, I didn't walk through the park. I walked through the cemetery. Where did I walk? Through the cemetery. Who walked through the cemetery? I did, AJ. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the cemetery? Or did I walk through the park? I walked through the cemetery. That's right. And I admired the beautiful on the color flowers. Did I admire the beautiful of the trees? No, I didn't admire the beautiful of the tree. Did I admire the beautiful of the children? No, I didn't admire the beautiful of the children. What did I admire? The flowers. Yeah, I admired the beautiful of all the colored flowers. Who admired the beautiful of all the colored flowers? That's right, IG. Me admire the beautiful of all the colorful flowers. Where were the flowers? On the grass in the cemetery. The flowers were on the grass in the cemetery. Were the flowers in the park? No, they weren't in the park. Were the flowers in my house? No, they weren't in my house. Where were the flowers? The flowers were on the grass in the cemetery. Where did I work? I worked through the cemetery. When did I work through the cemetery? November 1st, the day of the dead. November 1st, the day of the dead. I worked through the cemetery. What was the cemetery like? Like a party. It was like a party. The cemetery was like a party. Was curious about this holiday? Yes, I was curious about this holiday. Which holiday was I curious about? Yes, the Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead, so I walked through the cemetery. There was also color in the sky because many kids were flying kites. Where was the color? In the sky. That's right, in the sky. Why was there color in the sky? Because kids were flying kites. The kites. There was color in the sky because kids were flying kites. Who were flying kites? Kids. Kids were flying kites. Was the sky colorful or was the sky gray? The sky was colorful. What was colorful? The sky. The sky was colorful. Why was the sky colorful? Because kids were flying kites. What were the kids flying? Kites. That's right. The kids were flying kites. Where were they flying kites? In the cemetery. The kids were flying kites in the cemetery. Who was flying kites in the cemetery? Kids, children. Kids were flying kites in the cemetery. Some families were having a picnic next to the rice. We in the United States don't do this. So some families were having a picnic next to the rice. They ate, they drank, they chatted together. Did they eat? Yes, they ate. Who ate? Family, right? Of course, family ate. What did they eat? They ate watermelon food from Guatemala. The families ate watermelon food. Did they eat American food? No, they didn't eat American food. They ate watermelon food. Where did they eat watermelon food? In the cemetery. They ate food in the cemetery. They ate watermelon food in the cemetery. They also drank in the cemetery. Did they drink water in the cemetery? No. What did they drink in the cemetery? They drank beer. Who drank beer? The families. The families drank beer. What did they eat? Watermelon food. They ate watermelon food and drank beer. Did they drink beer or did they drink water? They drank beer. Where did they drink beer? They drank beer in the cemetery. When did they drink beer? November 1st. The day of the dead they drank beer. When did they eat? They ate on November 1st, the day of the dead. Did they chat together? Yes, they chatted together. Who chatted together? The families, of course. The family chatted together. When did they chat together? Yes, November 1st, the day of the dead, and people laughed and smiled. In the United States, cemeteries are always somber. Are cemeteries happy in the United States? No, never. Cemeteries aren't happy in the United States. Cemeteries are always somber, sad, and serious. Are cemeteries serious in the United States? Yes, they are. In United States, cemeteries are always somber. They are always serious. In the United States, are cemeteries somber or are cemeteries happy? Somber. Cemeteries are always somber in the United States. Was the cemetery somber in Guatemala? No, it wasn't somber in Guatemala. The cemeteries wasn't somber in Guatemala. But in the United States, cemeteries are always somber. Are cemeteries always somber in Guatemala or in the United States? In the United States, cemeteries are always somber. Where are cemeteries always somber? The United States. That's right. In the United States, cemeteries are always somber. Are they happy? No, they are always somber. Cemeteries in the United States are always somber. Very, very somber. We certainly never have festivals next to the rice. Do we have parties next to the race? No, we don't. We don't have parties next to the race. Do we ever have parties next to race? No, we never have parties next to race. Do we ever have parties in restaurants? Yes, we have parties in restaurants, but we never have parties next to race. Do we ever have parties in house? Yes, we do. We have parties in house, but we never have parties next to race. Do we ever have parties next to race? No, never. We never have parties next to race. Where do we never have parties? Next to race. We never have parties next to race. Do we ever? No, never. We never have parties next to race. Not ever. Never. We don't laugh or play music or play kites in cemetery either. Do we laugh in cemeteries usually? No, we don't. We don't laugh in cemeteries. Where don't we laugh? In cemeteries? That's right. I found that I referred the watermelon abroad. Did I find that I referred the American abroad? Or did I find that I referred the watermelon abroad? The watermelon abroad. I found that I referred the watermelon abroad. Did I find that I referred the American abroad? No, I didn't. I didn't find that I referred the American abroad. I found that I referred the watermelon abroad. Which abroad did I refer? I referred the watermelon abroad. Did I refer the American abroad? No. Who referred the watermelon abroad? Me, AJ. I referred the watermelon abroad. I found that I referred the watermelon abroad. I like the way they remember and celebrate those who had passed away. Did they celebrate those who are alive? No, they didn't celebrate those who were alive. They celebrate those who had passed away. Did they celebrate those who had passed away or those who had become rich? They celebrate those who had passed away. Who celebrate those who had passed away? Watermelons, right? Watermelons celebrate those who had passed away. When did they celebrate those who had passed away? On the day of the dead, November 1st. On the day of the dead, November 1st, they celebrate those who had passed away. Who celebrate the watermelons? Watermelon family celebrate. Who did they celebrate? They celebrate those who had passed away. I'd like that they acknowledge death instead of denying it the way Americans do. Who'd like that they acknowledge death? Did they acknowledge that? Oh, me, AJ. Me, AJ. I like that they acknowledge that. Did they acknowledge that? Money or did they acknowledge that? They acknowledge that. What did they acknowledge? That. They acknowledge that. Who acknowledged that? Watermelons, right? Watermelons acknowledge that. Did they acknowledge that or did they acknowledge money? They acknowledge that instead of denying it. Who denied that? Americans. Americans deny that. Do watermelons deny that? No, not watermelons. Watermelons don't deny that. Americans deny that. Do I like that Americans deny that? No, I don't. I don't like it. I don't like that Americans deny that, but I like that there is life as well as death in the watermelon cemeteries. I like that. Did I like their cemeteries? Yes, I like their cemeteries. What did I like? Their cemeteries, watermelon cemeteries. I like watermelon cemeteries. Did I like watermelon cemeteries or did I like watermelon restaurants? I like watermelon cemeteries. Whose cemeteries did I like? Watermelons, right? Watermelon cemeteries. I like the watermelon cemeteries. Watermelon cemeteries. Whose cemeteries did I like? The watermelon cemeteries. I like the watermelon cemeteries. Watermelons can't eat the day after death, but it is also a day to appreciate life. That is all for this mini story. This was very slow and sharp mini story, so this mini story is good for beginning level learners, for intermediate learners, for advanced learners. I use mini stories that are much faster or more difficult, but this mini story is for beginners. See you next time. Bye bye.